Good morning, everyone. So nice to see that some of you were able to join us. We will be recording this meeting, and as soon as it's posted, we'll make sure that you have the link so that you can listen in at a time that's convenient and works for you. I was thinking this morning, the last Title I directors meeting we had last spring was March 10th. And none of us at that time knew that the following week, everything was going to be closing down. Schools went on a soft dismissal. Our office closed. We are now in week 28 of what Superintendent Dixon likes to refer to as the new now. She doesn't like to call it the new normal because she said there's nothing about this that is normal. So after, I've been in public education in the state of Utah now for 41 years, and there's never been anything like this, never. So we know things are challenging right now. We know that people are working very, very hard. And from our agency and my staff, we want to express our deep gratitude to all of you for the work that you're doing. I have 6 grandchildren that are currently in school in Davis School District, and I'm grateful for their wonderful district leaders and their classroom teachers and principals who are working so hard to make sure that they're getting the education that they need while at the same time keeping them safe. There's just not enough gratitude out there, and I think that's so important right now that we express that. One day as I was traveling to the office, this is a couple of years ago, I stopped at a stop sign and the car in front of me had a bumper sticker. I'm not a fan of bumper stickers, but this bumper sticker said, "Have a grateful day." And that has always stuck with me. And I thought that's so important because sometimes we're so busy, we get so caught up in all of the hecticness of things that are going on and the chaos that's in the world right now. And we forget to stop and be grateful for people around us, people that we know and love, and they're working hard and doing things to serve us and those we love. So I want you to know how grateful we are for what you're doing. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce you to Tracy Van Deventer. We owe an apology to JM from Ogden and to Superintendent Nye in Ogden. We stole Tracy away from Ogden School District in July. Our superintendency has had a vision to create a USBE Center for Continuous School Improvement, looking at systemic improvement for the state agency, for LEAs, and of course for schools. And we should all be in that continuous improvement model, no matter where we are, what our circumstances are, what our data is telling us. There's always room for all of us to be improving. So I'd like Tracy to take a minute and introduce herself and talk to you a little bit about what she sees as the vision as she builds this center. And she joined our agency when everybody's working remotely, and so she's just been a trooper to jump into meetings and contribute, and she has a great vision. So Tracy.
Thank you so much, Becky. I am thrilled to be here. Here, right? Just in this series of squares on our screen, and I know that the work that you're doing is made that much more difficult because of all the challenges of COVID. And first and foremost, I want to thank you for being there, for your teachers, for your principals, for your students, for your families. The work that you're doing is so essential to help our world make it through this experience. And I want to thank you first and foremost for all of your efforts. I am really excited about the Center for Continuous School Improvement because I believe that all of us can get better always. And even though that journey might be difficult, there are so many resources out there, and it is our intent to try to pull together in this center a way for you to be able to access those resources, being able to tap into professional learning, to be able to find the materials and the data and other resources that will help you in your journey to get better. And I see it in 3 phases. Of course, our first initial phase is working with those turnaround schools and CSI schools that have been identified because they're kind of in the thick of it right now in that transformation process. They found themselves at the lowest 3 or 5% of the schools, and they are working, they're in the middle of the journey to take a step up and out. And we want to make sure that we've got immediate resources to support them as they continue on. Our next phase, though, that we're looking at developing support for is twofold. One, it's for those schools that have recently exited turnaround or in the future CSI. And historically, what we've set up is it's kind of your cutoff, if you will, because you've successfully exited that bar 3 or 5%. And in some ways, that is kind of a cold turkey approach that might not help us sustain over time, because we know school improvement takes time, and really to make a shift in your organization takes maybe more than just a couple of years. And so we're looking at building a gradual release support that would be available for those schools that are slowly moving out of that turnaround or that CSI model. And at the same time, we want to build a stronger red flag, if you will, system, so that you will have a heads up when you have a school that might be getting close to being identified, either as turnaround or as CSI. And at the same time, provide support before schools find themselves in that place where they now are in the identification process. And we know that we will be limited in what kinds of ways we can rearrange funds and provide that support, but it is our intent to do the best we can to find everything possible to support those schools in that gradual release, as well as to support those schools that are running the risk that they might find themselves in that place. And then, of course, the third phase, or the third group that we really want to focus on, is all of the other schools that we've got that have been doing their work. They've been growing, they've been continuing to expand, but they might find themselves wanting to specifically address a certain area that they feel might need some work. They want to focus on an area within their school system that they want to improve. Now, it could be on their own that they've identified a certain area, but it could also be a TSI group. It could also be a specific student group that students might not be succeeding as well as their peers or their colleagues within that school. So we see that as another a group that we want to address and provide support for, which might be unique than the other support that we've talked about in the other schools. Because if it's a specific targeted group, they might need specific targeted support that looks different. My experience is that I've been at the elementary, junior high, and high school at administrative level. I was at USBE back when it was called USOE, and they introduced something called internet. And I carried around my 100-foot phone cord and traveled the state and had a chance to really support schools then. I worked at Utah Education Network. I've been a resource teacher, behavior teacher, a classroom teacher, an instructional coach. I've maybe in many ways had too many jobs, but I love the challenges, I love the work, I love the growing, I love the learning, and I'm very excited about being in this position to help you. And then my final comments, just to let you know, I've been already reaching out to a number of people and asking if they could give me just some, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe more, if you'd like to talk more. But just to hear from you, what are the areas that you feel USBE could better serve you? As we continue to build the center, I want to make sure that the work that we do is meaningful, is appropriate, and is going to serve the schools that are in our state. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. You're in good hands with Dr. Donaldson, and I feel grateful to be here with her. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, we're very excited to have Tracy join us, and we look forward to her leadership, and we love working with her, and she does have a great way of working out and reaching out to people, and wants everyone to be involved and feel like they have input into the rollout of that center. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen now and pull up the slides. We're on a fairly tight agenda today, so I've got alarms set on my phone to kind of keep me focused and on the mark, so we make sure that our great presenters that are joining us this morning have time to do the presentations they've prepared. So let me pull this up. So are you seeing that? Tracy, would you not? Okay, great. We're going to go ahead then. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to move right along. Here are some dates I'd like you to be aware of, and on a couple of these I've changed and updated since Becky Peters may have sent you the slides, or the agenda may not have all of these. But this year we're in a unique situation for the 15% carryover waiver due to COVID-19. The U.S. Department of Education extended some additional flexibility. So all LEAs that need a waiver of that 15% carryover provision are eligible this year, even if you might have received a waiver last year or within the past 3 years. But you do have to apply for the waiver. It's not just automatic. So there is a form. I think I had Becky Peters send that out again yesterday when she sent the reminder. But if you need that and you can't locate it, please reach out to me and I'll make sure you get another copy. Our Title I applications for FY21 should be in Utah grants very soon. All of the paperwork's been submitted. The allocations are ready. We're just waiting for that to open in Utah grants. So those are due on November 1st, as they are typically. There's a new item I added right here. November 16th through the 18th, there's a team at USBE with our financial operations division that is working to arrange a virtual 3-day workshop with Brewstein and Manasevit. Brewstein and Manasevit is an education law firm located in Washington, D.C. They work closely with the U.S. Department of Education. They're very tied into what's happening at all times on the Hill, in Congress. So this will be an opportunity, since, you know, conferences right now are typically being held virtually. Nobody's able to travel out. So this will be an opportunity for business administrators as well as some program administrators to learn from these wonderful attorneys who know federal rules and regulations and all the fiscal components inside and out, and they're fabulous presenters. So we'll keep you informed as more information comes available on that. So on November 18th, we have another Title I directors meeting that is scheduled. So based on what rolls out with this Brewstein and Manasevit workshop, we may fold that into the Brewstein workshop, but we'll keep you updated on that. December 1st, the desktop monitoring instrument, the DMI, is due. We will not be having DMI training this afternoon. Our wonderful Val Murdoch recorded a WebEx session and documents to walk you through step by step through that process. So please refer to Val's excellent training that she put together. And you won't need to spend this afternoon in another workshop. The National ESEA Conference was scheduled to be held in Boston in February. They've moved to a totally virtual format this year as well. So those are the dates. And then March 17th, we'll have our spring Title I directors meeting. We'll hope for good things in 2021. And then we had to cancel the 2-day systems conference that was scheduled in August of this past year, or the end of July, I think it was. But the keynote speakers that we had arranged are very excited and willing to come if we're able to run that conference. It's tentatively scheduled right now. We don't have the dates, but it will be held at the Provo Convention Center if we're in a position where we can do that. We're excited today to announce our two 2020 ESEA National Distinguished Schools. Because we didn't have any data from spring of 2020, we looked back on previous year's data, and we're very excited to announce that the Academy for Math, Engineering, and Science in Salt Lake City, it's located within the Cottonwood High School. They're receiving the award for Category 1, which is Outstanding Academic Achievement over multiple years. Brett Wilson, who is also the Title I director for the school, and Brett is a wonderful supporter of Title I and reaches out with his school to recruit students that have been disadvantaged in some way. So he reaches out to students from low-income families, students who are from families that are refugees, and they just do amazing work there. So we're really excited and grateful for Brett and his board of directors for accepting that award. And then Ashley Elementary, which is located in Uinta School District, has done some outstanding work with their students who are English learners. And their English learners are achieving at, well above the state average and the district average. They're doing some outstanding work. So they will represent Utah as a Category 3 school, which looks at specific student groups and schools that are doing outstanding work for those student groups. Each time we meet, some of you may be thinking, oh no, here she goes again, but we always come back to what is Title I for? What is the statutory purpose of Title I? And that purpose is to make sure that all children and all youth have significant opportunities to receive a fair, equitable, high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. So as program people, we need to make sure that our Title I plans at both the LEA level and the school level, as well as the budgets and any expenditures we make, are aligned to that statutory purpose, right? We want the best for our students, and you can find that in the Every Student Succeeds Act in Section 1001. So throughout my career, I've always focused on this question right here: how will children and youth benefit from our actions? So here are some critical questions that we might think about as we're planning what to do with our Title I funds, what kinds of programs we might want to fund, initiatives we might want to engage in, and expenditure. So first of all, will that expenditure, that program or initiative, drive improved results for students, right? That goes directly back to that statutory purpose. Will it increase capacity within our LEA and within our Title I schools to improve results? Will it accelerate that continuous school improvement that Tracy talks about? And number 4, this one can be sort of a tricky one. Will this program, initiative, or expenditure avoid recurring costs once that funding may end? So if we use funding, we hire a lot of personnel, and then our funding decreases, or we have another need that's really pressing, then we find ourselves in a situation where we've funded people on maybe that money that's soft money, as we might refer to it as. And then what do we do at that point in time? We've either got to use a reduction in force, or move people around, or end a program that maybe had been successful. And then will we also be creating feedback loops that support that continuous improvement? So I thought those are good questions to keep in mind. We know that Title I expenses should always be supplemental in nature and always looking at increasing academic achievement, closing those achievement gaps, and thinking about, even though an expenditure may be allowable under Title I, it may not always be reasonable or necessary. And those are two other conditions we have to consider. So think about whether this thing that you're planning to do or something you're planning to buy is reasonable and necessary. We get a lot of reimbursement requests that come through our office, and we have our wonderful fiscal staff, Tammy Long and Sandra Grant. And so when a reimbursement request comes in for any of the title programs, they're the first people that see those. So they review those very closely before they go on to the program specialist for approval, and then they go to internal accounting for final approval. But oftentimes we get reimbursement requests that come in with expenses that are either not allowable or they're pretty iffy. So if we had had an opportunity to have met face-to-face, I would have done this in a more interactive, game-like activity. But since we don't have that opportunity and we're kind of short for time, I just put together a few slides looking at some examples. This does not include everything, obviously, but these are some that we get questions about. So for example, I'm looking at field trips, and there's some here that I put an asterisk by. Sometimes we have school principals that don't understand that Title I is not just a funding stream to take kids on recreational field trips. You can't take kids bowling because the kids were so great during the month of October. We want to reward those kids, and we want to take that class bowling. Or we have school principals that will, say, I'm going to take the kids to Boondocks or to Lagoon or, wherever it happens to be, to an amusement park or just some recreational kind of thing. That is not allowable. If a field trip has a specific educational purpose, but even then, you've got to make sure that you have documentation to support that. So if a teacher says, we're studying this particular topic in science or in history, and we want to go to the Natural History Museum up at the University of Utah, or the Science Museum, or whatever it happens to be, to the aquarium, then there has to be a direct tie into the grade level curriculum. Again, it's not just let's take kids somewhere fun, just because every year we want kids to have a field trip. If you're going to pay for it with Title I, you need to be a little bit careful about what you do. The next one I noted there is food for parent engagement. Food is a tricky one, and the only food you can purchase with Title I funds and other federal funds is food to support parental engagement activities. So if you're going to have a parental engagement activity after school and it occurs during a natural dinner time, then you can provide a light dinner. You might provide pizza or hot dogs, or something that's simple and easy and not really expensive. However, you can't provide parents with a big banquet that's catered and prime rib dinner or something like that. That's not acceptable. If you hold a meeting, say it's during the school day, it's not during a mealtime, you could offer a snack, maybe, a cookie and some juice, or, a light snack. But again, it has to be within reason. So one of the things that you may want to think about as an LEA is putting some sort of a policy or guideline in place for food purchases, and make sure that your school principals are aware of that, so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they're spending a lot of money on food and then it's not eligible. We've had LEAs submit reimbursement requests for hundreds of pounds of candy. Literally 700 pounds of candy came in on a reimbursement request. It totaled thousands of dollars. Obviously, that had to be rejected, right? And so the school said, well, it's for parent engagement, but really 700 pounds of candy? No, that doesn't fit the requirement of a light snack or, you know, a slice of pizza or something for a specific parent engagement activity. Fundraisers never. Any type of gifts, gift certificates, gift cards, that's an absolute unallowable expense. Whether it's we want to buy gift cards for our parents to incentivize them to come to this activity, or we want to buy gift cards or gifts for our students to, you know, encourage them to attend school or work on making up credits for graduation, not allowable. So please make sure your school principals are aware of those things. On this next page, instructional materials are fine as long as they're supplemental. You can't spend Title I money to buy your core reading program for Tier 1 instruction or your core math program. It has to be supplemental. Lodging and travel costs I marked as well. We've had primarily schools that have done this, and then, you know, the LEAs ask for reimbursement, but schools that have said, you know, our teachers have engaged in these school improvement activities, and they have worked so hard and they are exhausted. So we want to take them to Midway, to, you know, one of the resorts in Midway, and we want to, you know, pay for their lodging and provide them with really nice meals and massages, and they can go to the spa. No, that's not allowable. Or we want to take our staff on a retreat and we're going to go golfing. So we're going to a golf resort, we're taking our staff with us. And so we, you know, we're going to do some planning while we're there. No, that's pretty iffy. You can plan at the building, you can plan at the district office, but no, you don't need to take them to a golf resort or a spa and take them out of town or to a hotel and put them up and do planning. Right now, as we said, nobody's traveling for, you know, good reason due to the pandemic, but even in the past, we've had schools that wanted to take the entire faculty out of state to Anaheim to go to a conference that was being held at the Anaheim Convention Center next door to Disneyland. Again, that is iffy, right? You could have paid to bring a presenter into your school or district and more people would have benefited than paying airfare and lodging and meals and registration costs to take an entire faculty out of state for a training. So you really need to look closely at those things. And again, make sure your school principals are aware. Office equipment. If you are the Title I coordinator in your LEA and you know, have an office that needs to have, you know, you need to have a printer, you need to have a computer, that kind of thing, a fax machine, whatever it happens to be, that's perfectly fine. But if a school is buying just, you know, general equipment for the entire building, or the district has Title I and non-Title I schools, and you're buying a new, you know, big copy machine or something, that's probably not eligible. Again, parent awards, gifts, gift cards, banquets, incentives, not eligible. Consultant services, again, certainly are if it's, you know, related to the purposes of Title I. Oops, sorry about that. Skipped too far ahead. Where was I? So let's look at this one on salaries for district administrative staff or school support staff that serve non-Title I schools. Of course, that's not allowable. But what if you have some administrative staff that serve both Title I and non-Title I schools? Well, then you would have to do it on a prorated basis. So if that person spends 50% of their time serving your Title I schools, then 50% of their salary and benefits could come out of Title I. The other 50% would have to come out of other funding sources for the time that they're spending working with schools that are not Title I. Again, the same thing holds true for any kind of, we talked about student awards, gifts, incentives, treats, toys. We've had LEAs submit reimbursement requests in the past where they've been buying all kinds of toys, you know, Matchbox cars and fidget spinners and, you know, things like, we had a secondary school that wanted to buy earbuds for kids because they said, well, oh, we're trying to encourage them to come to school, or we're going to give them Amazon gift cards. No, not eligible. Okay. So we just want to make sure that you are aware of this, your principals and schools are aware of this. So when those reimbursement requests come in, then Tammy and Sandy don't have to reject those and send them back. Then we have business administrators that get upset and are saying, you know, they're picking on me. Why isn't this process? Why isn't it being approved? And if you have something that's questionable, or you have a principal that says, you know, I want to buy playground equipment or something like that, and you're not sure, or you know it's probably not eligible, but your principal doesn't want to listen, then call us, or we'll send an email saying, no, that's not eligible. And then you can go back and say, we checked with the state, it's not an allowable expense. Okay, we're willing to take that responsibility, because I know sometimes principals question things and, you know, they want to spend money on things that they really probably shouldn't. So again, they have to be necessary to operate the program. They have to be reasonable, which refers to, is this something that a reasonable person, is this amount that we're spending on this service or this product or this item, you know, reasonable in comparison to what an average person would be willing to spend, right? And then again, it has to be allowable under federal guidance, but it also has to be allocable to that particular funding stream. Okay, so those are things you need to keep in mind. If you have questions about some of these terms, we have our Title I Fiscal and Program Handbook that's on our website that has much greater detailed information, and you can, you know, download that and access it any time. And then if you have questions, we're always very willing and happy to help you in any way that we possibly can. So I'm watching the time, so I want to talk to you a few minutes about some federal updates and information. The first thing is, how does the federal government send Title I money to the states? It is not based on free and reduced lunch averages or percentages, the way that many LEAs choose to allocate money out to their Title I schools. There's a very complicated federal Title I formula. 97% of the money that we receive at the state level is based on the percentage of formula children, and those are children ages 5 to 17. Those are considered school-age children that are from families that meet the poverty guidelines set by the federal government. So, and there's a 2-year lag in how this data impacts this. So fiscal year, so in 2019, Utah's poverty rate was 8.9%. And if you look at this map from the Census Bureau, you can see that Utah is one of 3 or 4 states that are the lowest poverty states in the nation. In 2018, Utah had the 4th lowest poverty rate in the country. So states like Mississippi, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Alabama, those states hover around 20, 21%. So our share of poverty in the nation is low. So that impacts our, you know, the formula that applies to us right there. the 2020 census that's taking place right now is critically important because it establishes a baseline for the coming decade. So that 2020 census data will begin to impact our state in 2022. And we know that that census is wrapping up right now. And overall, you know, I think there's over 90% of homes that have responded, but there are certain pockets and certain areas of the state, certain neighborhoods where the response rate right now is quite low. It's really important that we make sure all of these children are counted. 3% of the formula is based on the state reported counts of children and youth that are in institutions for neglected and delinquent students. They're in publicly supported foster homes or families that are receiving temporary assistance for needy families that exceeds the poverty level. Utah's counts of these particular children has decreased over the past few years, especially since Utah's juvenile justice system implemented reforms a few years ago. So our poverty is low, our number of students for that item number 2 have decreased. The third thing that impacts our Utah Title I allocation is what is referred to as the adjusted state per pupil expenditure. Because Utah historically ranks low in the nation for the amount of money that the state legislature allocates for the weighted pupil unit, Utah is actually penalized on that item 3. So those are the things that impact how much money comes to us at the state level. And so your poverty counts based on census poverty data, and then each year after those 10-year census counts are in, they do estimates every year based on geographical areas of communities, counties, towns and cities, that kind of thing. So that is how the money comes into the state. It is not based on free and reduced lunch. A couple of quick updates on the CARES Act. Sarah Young is joining us today along with Patrick Lee, and they will be talking a little bit more about this later this morning. But the equitable services provisions that applies to school districts, it does not apply to charter LEAs or even charters with multiple campuses. It only applies to school districts that have geographical boundaries. There's an equitable services provision in the CARES Act, just as there is in all the title programs, that indicate that districts have to reach out to private school officials, consult with them, and determine an equitable share of services, not funding, but services that will be provided to students attending private schools, their teachers, and their parents. The CARES Act says in the actual statute that this should be provided in the same manner as Section 1117 of ESEA, which refers to the Title I methodology. The Department of Education interpreted that differently, and they said rather than basing it on the number of low-income students who will reside within the boundaries of a Title I school that are attending the private school, the Department of Ed said it had to be based on the total student population in the private school. This impacted a number of states and a number of districts across the nation quite a bit. In fact, there's a district in one state, and I had a colleague who told me they have 100 private schools within that district. So under the methodology proposed by Secretary DeVos, that school district was providing well over half of their CARES Act funding out to private schools and had very little remaining to serve the schools in the district. So there were a number of lawsuits filed against the Department of Education, And there was one filed in Washington, D.C. by the NAACP. The court in Washington, D.C. ruled on that case in September 4th. And what they determined was that the Department of Education had overstepped their legal authority. They had issued an interim final rule in July, and so that rule is now no longer in effect. So equitable services reverts back to the Title I-A methodology, which is based on the low-income students that reside within the private school that also live within the boundaries of a Title I public school. A quick update on what's happening in Congress, which isn't much. Current funding for the federal government expires next Wednesday. The federal fiscal year 2021 begins October 1st. The House passed 10 of 12 budgets, including the budget for the Health and Human Services, Labor, and Education departments. The Senate has passed 0 budgets. The president proposed a block grant. So what's likely to happen is that Congress will have to implement a continuing resolution to fund the government through December or maybe February. And the House has already passed their version of that. The Senate has not acted on it. So that's where we stand. Hopefully they'll get something in place so there's not a government shutdown like there was a few years ago. So here's kind of a historical look at our funding. This is overall funding across the nation. So the House has put their budget proposals together. They proposed a slight increase overall for Title I, and I've listed a couple of other programs there. The President fiscal 21 budget talks about education for the disadvantaged block grant. So his proposal is to roll all of the ESEA funding into one block grant, reduce the overall allocation by almost $5 billion. So it would include everything. It would include homeless, migrant, neglected and delinquent, Title II funding for teachers, Title I, Title III. It would all be rolled into that block grant. So that is his proposal. So there's information there about that you can read a little bit more about. Congress would have to, of course, act on that if that's something that they chose to do. But anyway, these are some of the talking points that the administration used to say why they wanted to move to a block grant rather than these individual programs. Hopefully there'd be guardrails in place if that were to happen. They'd still require school improvement for the bottom 5% of Title I schools, as well as schools with student group gaps, which is currently, our TSI schools are in that category. So these are our allocations over the past 3 years. So here's our current fiscal year 21. Sometimes the Department of Education reduces that amount before the end of that fiscal year, or sometimes they'll increase it a little bit. This is what we have right now. If the block grant were to pass Congress, Utah's total combined allocation for 21, if the president's proposal went through, would be $96 million. That would include every title program, which is a decrease. Because currently we have, I think, around 100 million or more with all the separate programs. So braiding funds, we have 2 wonderful districts that are going to talk to us today. JM from Ogden and Missy Hamilton from Murray will talk to us about what they're doing to really use their funding streams to maximize the use of their funds by braiding them and serving students and reducing duplication and things like that that are really exciting. So I'm going to wrap up. You have our contact information here. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and we'll turn the time over to JM, Sandra Jolovitz-Moats from Ogden School District.
Well, thank you so much. And before we begin, I want to say that we're so proud to have Tracy join your team. We were very honored for getting to have her as part of our team for a short period of time, and we're just very excited to share her with everyone else. She is a talent. So thank you for this opportunity. Do you want me I just share my screen, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so let's do this. Share, present. All righty. So as I'm presenting, Tracy, I'm going to ask you a favor. Can you, if there's a question that comes up in chat, can you just interrupt me and ask that? Okay, I appreciate that. I've been asked to present to you and share with you how we've braided our resources in Ogden School District recently as an example. We offered a summer bridge program, and our objectives were to get reading books in the hands of kids, decrease the summer slide, credit recovery, provide social emotional learning, and face-to-face outside learning opportunities, because we had gone from virtual from the dismissal, and we wanted to experiment and pilot what it would look like to offer some face-to-face in combination to virtual to prepare for this upcoming fall that we just experienced. So we had different elements, a literacy grab and go packs in which we provided culturally relevant, authentic texts. Every book, every student in our district, elementary through junior high through 9th grade, received 3 or 5 books at a minimum, Think More sheets, and family guides to literacy. And we also added a social emotional learning focused guide. And here's our data. We had 883 grab and go packs only distributed. And then we had an additional 396 grab and go packs in combination with participating in our virtual lit camp, for a total of 1,279 students receiving this opportunity to read in the summer. And then we disaggregated our data, and this is just looking at the grab and go packs, not the lit camp. 89 of the students requesting and receiving were special education, 328 EL learners, Native Americans 37, economically disadvantaged 850, and migrant were 3. One thing that we learned is from our data consistently as we share with you is that we have a lot of work to do with some of our targeted groups, and we put some things into place that I'll hit at the very end. Okay. And then in combination, this is lit camp and grab and go packs, and you can see the breakdown there. We got a variety with our SPED, our ELs. And then we wanted to combine everything together. And so we served 140 students with our grab and go packs and our lit camp virtually combination, 408 language learners, 52 Native American. We were really happy with that number because it's not always that high in their summers. 1,160 in our economically disadvantaged, and 8 migrant. We're down in our migrant, and so we've put some things in place there to make sure that we identify our migrant families and serve them better. And of course, the numbers represent children, and here's just a couple of the quick pics that were taken as we were doing deliveries or pickups. Our lit camp was virtual, and that was with Scholastic, and it blended social emotional learning and academic literacy development with very flexible, and it was very flexible. So students could sign up for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, up to the full 6-week program. We had this was our daily average attendance, total number of students who participated in 1 or more weeks. This was, we did a parent survey after each session, and we were excited to see that the parents indicated that they felt their child were better prepared for the school year after participating in this. And then we had 13 fourth quarter no grades converted to passing for our junior high students who participated, so that was exciting. We also, for the students that attended 5 or 6 weeks, we did a Lexile reading level summary, And so we had 83 students who completed the actual pre and post test. And here's our results. 63% of the students who attended the 5 to 6 weeks, their Lexile scores either stayed or the same or increased, which was one of our objectives. And we actually had one student make a significant Lexile gain, and 11 students that gained more than 100. So we had some students get very excited about that. We also offered a virtual math boot camp, which was a 6-week program. And if you haven't noticed, I'm just paraphrasing some of the slides because I don't want to just read a slide to you. The math boot camp was designed to target the major works of the grade level mathematics core standards for grades 3 through 8. And here are some of our numbers. Student average daily attendance was 60. Total number of students who participated in at least one or more week was 163. And again, our parent indicator with our survey, 90% satisfied, and 12th, fourth quarter, no grade converted to passing. Which we were, to be honest, we were a little nervous doing more virtual, because we had been doing district surveys throughout the whole dismissal period, and parents were many times telling us they're really tired of virtual learning, their kids needed a break, we're struggling with engagement. So we were excited to see some of these numbers. Here's our disaggregated amounts. Again, we need to work with our migrant students. Our Native American students weren't as highly representative as they were with the literacy grab and go packs. Secondary math, I just want to give a little background here. About 3 years ago, we implemented where we do face-to-face for secondary math. It's held at a high school. It's for junior high and high school students that need credit recovery. And we generate a lot of credit because the students, the teachers have had the students before. We know what didn't work, and they actually enjoy coming back with a more targeted approach, and we saw great progress and great results from that over the last 3 years. We tried to do that virtually because with the situation, we weren't comfortable having that many kids in a room. And so when I share the results from this, it's not as much as we usually have in credit recovery, but we were still happy to see that we were able to recover some credit because our kids were burned out with virtual. And our secondary math, what we adapted is we took what we did in the summer and created the Canvas courses designed to recover credits in secondary math 1, 2, or 3 and require foundational skills. We had 28 average daily student attendance. And as I was saying previously, we would do 2 to 3 week group sessions, and we'd have 32 per class. So the attendance was down, but at least we were able to maintain some attendance, and we did recover 47 credits. We have been getting into the hundreds, in the low hundreds. So that was a little low for us, but at least we again said at least we recovered 47 of the 0.25 credits. Here's how the targeted broke down. Again, we really struggled. We found a lot of our students were accustomed to having jobs, being on virtual learning and during the dismissal, and they were kind of sick of the virtual learning. Now, our 3 high schools, Ogden, Ben Lomond, and George Washington is our alternative site. They each hosted additional credit recovery, not for math, but for all other subject areas, face-to-face and virtual combination. And for the students that failed the prior 4th term. And so here are a couple of our graduates from Ben Lomond who were able to graduate because of this summer program. And they were pretty excited with their diplomas. Ogden High, here is their, we called it support cafe attendance. And the kids liked that reference. And they were able to recover 223 4th quarter grades that were previously no grades to converted to pass, and 27 of the 0.25 credits in a variety of other topics. Ben Lomond did have a bigger success. They managed to recover 499 4th quarter credit conversions and 87.25 credits. The Ben Lomond community really enjoyed coming face-to-face to the summer cafe, so that was really exciting. George Washington, our alternative school, this is really fabulous. 91.25 credits were recovered. They had 15 average daily attendance in session 1. It went down in session 2 to 6. However, 30 students recovered 1 or more 0.25 credits. So we were very proud of that. We also, for the very first time, offered initial credit, Ogden Online and original credit courses, and we gave that a go to see, okay, how's that gonna go virtually? And we offered it in US government, fitness for life, and financial literacy. And as you can see, these are the number of credits that were earned, 17.5 credits there, 12 half credits, fitness for life, and 20 half credits for a total of 49 credits. And here is the breakdown for our Ogden Online. Again, we did not get a lot of participation from some of our key groups, but it was refreshing to see that 28 of our economically disadvantaged students took advantage of that online free initial credit opportunity. Our elementaries were also a part of this program. We, in addition to the virtual sessions in the Lit Camp and the Math Boot Camp, they also offered face-to-face targeted on-site learning. So here's just a breakdown. There's 2 slides. I'll let you look at that of some of our elementary schools. And we looked at the categories of number of students who are on site, average daily attendance, number of home visits or back to school appointments, number of students that some of their plans involve targeting fall tutoring that's taking place now, some of home connections and support for social emotional learning, and total number of students served. And as you can see here, I'd like to point out Heritage is one of our comprehensive school CSI schools for academics, and James Madison is one of our CSI schools for state turnaround. And then some more of our schools right here, same categories. And then I do believe the totals on the next slide. Yes, so we had a total of 608 students learning on site, an average daily attendance of 47.6. This is amazing, 2,186 home visits or individual meetings with parents, 322 students that are participating in fall tutoring, and 1,467 phone connections, which involved phone and virtual with the computer to provide that SEL support. So we had a total of 3,198 students served by their individual sites, in addition to what we had already shared with our literacy and math boot camps. And again, here is just a couple pictures. Right here, this is James Madison offering their face-to-face, and this is Odyssey Elementary offering their face-to-face. All our kids wearing our masks. And we learned a lot from experimenting with that, of what to put in place in our fall plans as well. Our junior highs were not left out as well. They offered site-to-site transition learning, and right here we have the number of students registered, average daily attendance, and again, they focused on 4th term credits recovered, number of gap credits recovered, and the number of students exiting school with all the credits. So if we look at the totals, we had 951 of our students registered with an average daily attendance, 1,050 4th term credit recovery credits recovered. This is huge. We were so worried with the dismissal period that our kids would lose so much of their learning, and we were able to recover a lot of that. Gap credits recovered, and we had 268 more students who exited the summer school with all their credits going on to the high school, which was so exciting. And so number of total 0.25 credits recovered in our junior highs, that was very impressive. And so our kids were much better to start off the fall, so it was very good use of our funding. And here's Mount Fort. They sent us some of their pictures of some of their face-to-face learning. As you can see, individual, small group, and it was all subjects. here's a student with a saxophone. And so all subjects, all teachers were part of this program. Are there any questions yet before I go
Yeah,
to the
perfect,
social
Jim.
emotional
I was
learning?
just going to interrupt. So
Okay.
first of all, you've been getting lots and lots and lots of kudos and amazing and wow, and they want to know more. But there has been just a little conversation about the funding and how it was graded. So maybe that's still coming up, but we wanted to make sure you address that.
Okay, I can do that right now. We took our ESSER funding that was allotted to our district, and we took a portion of that, our superintendent did, and we offered that all schools, it was his expectation that they offered some type of face-to-face so we could transition for the fall and recover learning. So every school had to submit a plan. I worked with them initially first to fine tweak it, and then we sent it to the superintendent for approval. Then we looked at all the funding requests. We narrowed some of them so then they could get their ESSER funding out of that portion he set aside. I also took Title I funds. We utilized some of our leftover IGP funds that we could use in June. We used some of our Gear Up funding. We utilized also our U-Star funding and coordinated that for some of our secondary math virtual learning. We also braided, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, some of our grant funding that funds our social emotional learning. I don't want to say which exactly ones it was because they just shared that funding with the resources of the folks, and we braided all of it. And then we also had donations from our community partners, United Way, to help with their, maybe not funding wise, but they donated their time of their people to make that happen. Because we have to remember, braiding resources is not just all money, it's value in people as well. And then we also had a lot of volunteers that worked in that. So we braided a lot. Oh, and then we also braided with some of basic funds. And then our food service was a critical component as well. So all of it was braided together. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, and my own question then is, as you were looking at braiding those funds, did you just pull all those people together to kind of make a plan, and people would sort of say, here's how we can support, or here's how our department can? How did you determine that?
Well, we do have a practice that the title funding that's not used at schools, by the end of the year, that's always applied towards the summer school learning. So we took that small chunk. Then we met with principals and all of our partners and said, okay, this is what their plans are going to entail. This is what we need to do virtually as well. How do we fund it? And that's really what it was, the bottom line. And then so I provided to Rich all the school plans in a Google sheet, and then a big tab that tracked all the funding sources and how much everyone was putting in, so he could see all the money that was going to fund this. And then also we were going as a district set aside with Title I funding, working with parent engagement and getting books in the homes. So we had put aside some money for that last year. So we just saved that and we applied that towards the Scholastic book pack purchases. So then whatever wasn't used, we can utilize this year for the same purpose.
And maybe you feel you've already addressed this when you talk about your spreadsheet, but how did you track restricted versus unrestricted funds so that they were applied appropriately to make sure you covered all the services?
Oh, when I met with each one of the different folks that were over that funding, we looked at that. We said, what are you able to provide services for? What are you able to do? Like, for example, our IGP could only be used for certain sites during the summer and for only up until a certain time. So we had to be very careful, and we just had to be very careful at tracking that. And I have a wonderful team that are very experienced with summer school, and we just kept everything separate but braided it. It took a lot of work, and then we also, I have to be honest, we have an assistant principal that was just named as assistant at Ogden High, but she was an intern for us. LaJean Elder, who was my right hand in helping to prepare this summer school and coordinating, because it took extensive coordination and implementation. And so she was critical in that process as well. It just took a lot of effort with a lot of folks, but it just shows you what can be done if you put your mind to it.
Perfect. There's no more questions.
Okay, and so we wanted to, it was critical. We have a wonderful student advocacy team led by Aspen Henderson. And here's just a couple quotes. I really liked the second one. I completed 400 plus home visits, registered all 551 students for the free reading books. Then our team delivered the books along with the pantry packs to students. As you see the pantry packs there, that was with Ken's team and our volunteers with United Way. We did weekly and bi-weekly visits with around 21 families, impacting about 31 kiddos each time. I called families just to check on them, called to get current addresses when we were unable to make a home delivery. I am guessing around 35 to 40. Oh, and this was one of our Ogden behavior interventionists. So here's their stats. 1,331 students were targeted for Achievement Club or a Child Achievement Assessment Team intervention. During the summer, any of the students that participate in Achievement Club or are designated by a site's child assessment team that needs social emotional learning support, the team continued those services throughout the dismissal and the summer. They created videos for the parents and the students. They interacted with the students, provided them their extra intervention support, all of that to try to help those behaviors even while they were at home trying to learn. So 765 average supports given per week, documented supports of different types, over 5,000. We had 8 therapists working with kids while at home during the summer virtually, and we had 60 plus employees providing summer support. That was a big component of the braiding, where funding sources couldn't give money, but they had people on their payroll that could work in the summer, and the work they were going to do with students met their guidelines. They were put to work on this program as well. And here's just one of our behavior interventionists providing that individual support with Adele, bringing her book pack, but also providing her those social emotional learning while she provided the book pack. And then my last summary was what we learned, and I didn't put it in a slide, from our most at-risk population, our migrant and our Native American population. After looking at those numbers and the number of students that have been identified effectively, we decided to make a more systematic approach. Traditionally, as a district, we had one district home liaison who took the lead with our migrant families, and then also who took the lead with our Native American families. We decided to make a more systematic approach and maximize one of our partnerships. With United Way, we have presently 9 community school coordinators that are full-time at 9 of our sites. And then those community school coordinators this year have taken on a sister school. So all of our sites now have a school community coordinator that helps them. We've now trained our community school coordinators in how to identify migrant students and how to identify Native American students. And that's what they're in the process, and our homeless students. So they're working with our district liaison that takes the lead on that. They've learned how to identify. They're doing the identification process right now, which is leading them to building those relationships, and then leads to them being more engaged and part of the programs that we offer. So we've made a more systematic approach due to what we saw happening in the summer. And that's everything we have. And let me stop presenting. I got to figure out how to do that. Okay, exit.
That was great. That was a really fabulous example of the power of braiding funds to support students and to really maximize services. When you braid funds, every funding stream retains its individual identity. So as Jan was saying, then you can track it back and make sure that specific funding streams are covering costs that are allowable under that funding stream. I put a note in the text box, but one of the things we've talked to our Utah Grants Management team about is that in the future, we're hoping that we can pay the vendor to do programming that will facilitate LEAs in having that ability to braid funds and blend funds more easily. Right now, there isn't funding to support what it would cost to do that programming, but they're very interested and very supportive of that. So hopefully in the future, that can be built into the grants management system. Okay,
Stop sharing. Found it. Sorry. Took me forever. Go ahead. I'm sorry if you saw everything on there. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Jam. You're a rock star. We are so grateful because that's just such a great example. It's just, we couldn't have asked for better. It's just perfect.
Thank you. I'm just not very good with Zoom. Sorry about that, everybody. So ignore if you saw a whole bunch of stuff on my screen.
We're all learning WebEx and Zoom and 100 other things, and it's all confusing, but it went very well. Thank you, Jam. So we're going to switch now, and we'll let Missy Hamilton take control, and she's going to talk to us about an exciting initiative that Murray did to ensure that their Title I students had access to the technology that they need to be successful.
Thank you very, very much. Holy cow, am I proud to say that I started my education teaching career in Ogden City School District, but that was way back in the day when Central Middle School still existed. So anyway, impressive work. That was awesome. I was over here cheering and shouting and you couldn't even hear me, although I did catch attention from the office going, what is going on in your office? So congratulations, Ogden, that is awesome. Becky, I have a question. I think you saw it in my chat where I said, reasonable cost as a reasonable person. And I don't know, yesterday I ate my body weight in peanut butter M&Ms and Swedish fish. And so I think some days a reasonable cost is your body weight in candy. And so I think if you get a reimbursement request from Murray this year of that amount, I think maybe you ought to let that one float through because this is 2020 and I think that is absolutely reasonable. Can I hear an amen in the field? There you go. See, that's what I'm saying.
Good for Missy's survival.
All right, so I am going to share my screen and I am going to pop y'all over to Google Earth. This is Google Earth Pro. And can I, Tracy, I can see you on my screen. Am I good? Okay. So what we see here is a Google Earth, and I'm sure many of you have seen it. Some of your schools are probably even using it as an engagement tool. But what we see is just the valley. Sorry, I'm not going clear north to Ogden or down south to some of my friends in Carbon District, but I do see them on the call, hey. And what we see out here is Magna, and it's got a big red dot, probably not because it's a city, but because it's the epicenter of a horrible earthquake center. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm going to just go over here to the side here, and I'm going to put in here US school districts. And you can see in here, it flipped Granite School District and Salt Lake City School District, but it does have all of our school districts mapped here. And so you can see in purple, we have Murray City School District, okay? All of our schools in Murray City School District. See how many? Oh my gosh, we're huge. So I am also, what we've done is I pulled over those schools with the geocode, but then what we also did was pull over our demographics. So I don't know who is recording. Is that you, Val, that's manning that? What I am going to ask, and I'll tell you, don't do it now, is at one point I am going to have you pause the recording because I'm going to pop up some things, and it does have identifiable data that when we post it to the website, I don't want that out there, but I want you guys to see what we have. So don't do that yet. I'm gonna wait and I'll pop those things up when the time is right, and I'll just ask if we can pause that recording for just a couple of seconds. I'll make sure I narrative it out so that those people who are watching the recording will know what we are going to see, but I don't actually want that out there. All right, so what we did was download our demographic data, and I'm gonna pop that up. So there's Murray, and those are our students that are enrolled in Murray City School District. And I actually zoomed this out because you can see that we actually have students clear out into Willa. If you see that, that's crazy, right? And we actually have some students clear up in Ogden and Bountiful as well. My guess is, in researching that, we have some students whose parents work in the Valley in a couple of instances, and we actually have some parents who teach in Murray City School District, so they commute all the way down, which is fine by us, right? So I just wanted to show you that, but we do have so many students that are out of boundary. 25% of Murray City School District's student enrollment are from out of district, which is super scary, but it's quite intriguing to us to know and understand that. So I'm going to fly us in and share with you some interesting data that we discovered in the spring. So right in here, so here's the I-15 corridor, here is the hospital, okay? And then here is Murray High School, here is Hillcrest High School, just to show you and try to orient you in space where we're at. So in the spring, and I'm sure that you guys have probably heard this, we were pretty prepared. We went one-to-one, and we went one-to-one in very short order. When I came on board, we had a 3-year plan, and that 3-year plan became a reality in about 6 months. So every single student in Murray District has a Chromebook. We have touchscreen Chromebooks for students in grades K through 3. And now this year, we actually have enough Chromebooks for students to have a Chromebook at home, K through 2 students, to have a Chromebook at home and have a Chromebook at school, so they don't have to carry it back and forth. And then our students 3 through 12 carry their Chromebooks back and forth to school and home. That's been a lifesaver, especially since we have a hybrid option where some days they come to school, some days they're working at home. And so for our K through 3s, we don't have to worry about all of that transfer and figuring that out. There's been a few glitches with that and a few bumps and bruises along the way, but that's been where we're at, which has been really handy. So we didn't have to worry about access in that case. So all of our students, whether they're Title I, whatever, we have access for all of those students. What we had to worry about was accessibility in terms of wireless access for those students. So when we closed down in the spring, here's what we discovered. We discovered that we had pockets and students that didn't have wireless access in our schools. So what we did was we geocoded all of these kids and we heat mapped all of our kids. So what we have here are all of our students, and you can see conglomerations, right? So right outside and behind Hillcrest, you see a large group of students that are here. This is an apartment complex behind Hillcrest Junior High School. And right over here, this is an apartment complex here and here that serves Horizon Elementary. And then right over here is Parkside Elementary. And interestingly enough, this apartment complex here goes over to Parkside. And this apartment complex goes also over to I think it's Redwood Elementary or Roosevelt Elementary. I'm not all the way sure, which those of you who serve in that area in Granite know that that is a high refugee student body and demographic. We have a couple of apartments in that same complex that go to Parkside as well. So what we have done when we went into closure is we had a whole lot of wireless access points that we clearly didn't need at Murray High School, right? So we climbed up there, and this was the first week of closure. We had students saying, and they were calling our tech office saying, we can't get Wi-Fi, we don't have enough speeds. They were having to download videos, so they just were getting bogged down. And several students, of course, this was a complex, right? So they had wireless through their rental agreement. So we worked with that rental property manager, and we said, what can we do? So we went into Murray High School. We took down like 300 wireless access points there. And we went over to this apartment complex, and I'm gonna zoom in and drag down. So we went over to this apartment complex, and we hung wireless access points. And if you've ever been to this apartment complex, it's just cement everywhere, right? So we hung wireless access points all over inside of this apartment complex. And then we called Utopia and we said, we need your help. We need you to turn up your speeds. We need to turn up. And we became kind of the wireless internet service provider for this apartment complex. And we were pretty vicious and aggressive about getting access to these kids. And this is why. And here's where I'm going to ask you to pause the recording. Computing grant through STEM Action Center. And so we hired high school students as interns, and they do all of the fixing on it. So we're able to turn those around within 24 hours and do all of the repair work on it. We also have our parents, if they want to purchase Chromebook insurance for $25, so that we don't have like a deficit spending in that case. So we use that Chromebook insurance and we're able to turn those around within 24 hours. So we have a stash of Chromebooks that we're able to deploy, and we get those back, we repair them, and then we put that back in our stash. So we really don't have a ton of breakage. The touch screens are an issue, but that's why we decided to get two. And so they have one at home and one at school. So that was actually by design, but we really don't. The kids really take care of them because it has their name on it. They know that it's theirs. They take really, really good care of it. They're really pretty responsible. We really don't have a ton of issues. You want to know what we have major issues with is actually the charging cords. The charging cords have more issues than the actual Chromebooks themselves. What other questions are there? Awesome. I want to share one other thing, total shift from technology, because I wear lots of different hats. So I'm going to throw on my equity hat. Here is Horizon Elementary. It is a Title I school. And I know that everybody has been dealing with the BLM and equity issues. I just wanted to share really quick something that Horizon Elementary is doing, and that is their equity issues. So they initially in August had a full faculty meeting where they landed on a definition of racism. They watched the trailer to Precious Knowledge and talked about their purpose in providing a space for having equity conversations and not being afraid of that. We had district-wide equity training as well, and then now we're having training on implicit bias. Step two, and this was critical, several of our teachers took the Second Steps curriculum that we have, and they embedded equity practices that would pair nicely with that curriculum. And so in August, they talked, or in September, they're talking about being assertive and using assertive language. In October, they're talking about empathy, sexuality, gender, and understanding differences. In January, they're talking about how to handle name calling and in that equity space. In March, they're talking about or in February, they're talking about Black History Month and being responsible. So they found those topics that paired nicely. Step three was they worked with King's English Bookstore up in Sugar House to create a list for K through 6 of equity and anti-racist books for each teacher to have in their classrooms. And then they use those topics in restorative circles. So, and I'm happy to send this to you, but King's English Bookstore recommended all of these titles for every grade level. And so we bought those books for them out of in Title I money to make sure that all of our teachers had these titles. And then step four, the faculty created a justice team. And so they are creating student extension ideas in Google Classroom so that we can access that kind of curriculum for all of our learners. And so they have, this is their equity extensions in Google Classroom. And so this is an example of some of them. That Black is a rainbow color. They have these different playlists of different people, celebrities reading different poems. And then they have music playing at lunch. So here's a couple of poems and some music. And so there's examples of restorative circle questions. So Black is history, Black is family, Black is memory, Black is community, Black is the love that lives inside of me. My color is Black. What is your color? Or a restorative circle question about this. Where do you notice your color? So anyway, this was just a really cool example of how they are really embedding those things. And then as a faculty, they're talking about the USBE statement in 2017 about equity practices and what that means, and getting a really assertive statement for the district of equity practices across our district. So between equity and technology and making sure that kids have equal access and accessibility, we have our hands full in Murray. So happy to help wherever, and happy to share my email and contact information. I'll drop it in the chat.
Missy, that was really incredible. Thank you so, so much.
Yeah, for sure.
So really such a great example of, again, of really, you know, thinking outside of the box, figure out where those kids were and making sure they were going to have access to what they need to be successful during remote learning. And then also this wonderful focus on equity and infusing that throughout the school year and having faculties engage in, you know, in discussing that work is so important. So thank you so much for your willingness to share.
If I could jump in though, just to make sure Missy saw the comment that said there are people who would like a copy of the book list, and if you shared it maybe with USBE, we could share it out.
You bet, you bet. And I'll drop it in the chat as well as share it to Becky so that you guys can get that out.
That would be perfect, Missy. Thank you so much. And I think, JM, is it okay if we provide your slides to people? Okay, great. I thought it would be, but we want to make sure we ask you. Yeah, I think people were very impressed with what they've heard and such absolutely fabulous examples of how, you know, LEAs are thinking in ways that really are empowering teachers and staff and really reaching out to all students, all families, everywhere. So I am so grateful. We have a break coming up at 10:40. So at this point in time, do any of you have questions you'd like to ask before we'll take a quick comfort break at 10:40 for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for the rest of the meeting. But right now, since I kind of raced through my slides, trying to make sure we stayed on schedule, I'm happy to take any questions right now. So I think we answered the question about providing copies of JM slides and Missy's book list and contact information. Tracy, did you notice any questions that maybe we didn't have an opportunity to answer? Oh, Amy has a question right now. This is for Missy. How did you make the geomap, Missy?
Great question. So what we did was, it's just if you can see, and I'll quick share again, it's just a CSV file that and this is Google Earth Pro right here, and you just pull over your CSV file of your demographic data. We still use Aspire, and then we also coded your CSV file. So it takes some tooling around with Google Earth Pro, but we just use a CSV file, and you go up to Google Earth Pro and you can import whatever file you need, and then it asks you to oh, it's asking me to reload it because I've already imported it. But then it'll ask you, like, what colors do you want your little pins? What shape do you want it? You know, how do you want it to look? Do you want it color coded, or do you want it to be color coded by the house, or do you want it to be color coded by a pin? All of that stuff. So it takes a little bit of tooling around, but basically you download your CSV file and you go over to import. And it gets a little messy. I'm happy to try and figure it out with you, but sometimes it takes a little bit of tooling around in Google Earth Pro.
Thank you, Missy. That was so helpful. What other questions do we have? If we don't have any additional questions right now, I'm going to suggest that we take our 10-minute break now so everybody can get up and move a little bit, get get some more water to drink or whatever you need. And let's come back at, it's 10:34 right now. Let's come back at 10:45. That'll give you 11 minutes. And we'll start back with Sarah Young and Patrick Lee, who will share more information about the CARES Act. Thanks, everyone.
Hi. Yeah, I was. Another day. I don't know. Just another day.
Sarah and Patrick, are you guys ready to roll?
I sure am.
Oh, great. Okay,
I'm
we
here
have,
too, but letting Sarah take over.
yeah, okay.
Was that my cue? Are we starting? Are we waiting for people?
I think we'll go ahead and get started. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Sarah Young. Sarah is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at USBE, and Patrick Lee is the Finance Director in our Financial Operations Department. So I'm going to turn the time over to them, and they're going to talk to you about the CARES Act, and also they have some exciting news to share, I think. So go ahead, Sarah and Patrick. Thank you.
Awesome. Becky, thank you so much, and appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you to be able to talk a little bit about CARES, some of the reporting requirements that have been established by the U.S. Department of Education, so that you have a heads up on that. And then to Becky's point, some information that is being considered by our State Board of Education in their October board meeting next Thursday, that has implications in regards to resources and next steps in our response to COVID-19. So in recognizing that we have some folks who may have been a part of different components of this conversation, I wanted to just start with kind of the overview of where we are with CARES funding in relationship to K-12 in the state of Utah. So on this slide, you will see just kind of the broad kind of strokes of where we are. So for the K-12 ESSER funding, we as a state received 67 million and change in regards to providing funding that is meant for K-12 and their response to COVID-19 by the U.S. Department of Education. Of that funding, 61 million was distributed using the federal formulas that were included in the legislation to our LEA members. That had then a 10% that was set aside for state uses. You may remember, and some of you are probably engaged in, the state did choose to authorize some of this funding to make sure that every LEA had a base amount of a little over $21,000 in regards to their award coming from ESSER. So that either came directly through your initial fund of the 61 million. For some folks, you received a little out of both pots of money to get you to that floor. And then for some LEAs, you received all of your funding from the state set aside. But that's really where we were in terms of allocations. The second kind of key line item that we've had access to is GEAR funding, or the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. So that is around $29 million, and that has been distributed as well through the Utah Grants Management System with a specific focus on serving special education and at-risk students. So the solutions and the plans for those have been here kind of within this space. So what we're here to talk to you about today is then everyone's favorite, the reporting requirements that are going to be associated with these funds. So in a traditional best practice grant setting, these elements are things that are available at the time of application to a program or a fund. Unfortunately, due to the immediacy of the needs related to COVID-19 and how quickly we were trying to put CARES funding out to the field, the U.S. Department of Education is still catching up on those steps related to what are they going to require from both the state as well as local awardees in terms of reporting related to these funding streams. So Patrick and I are here today to give you an overview of what these reporting requirements look like so that you have kind of awareness of what these elements look like and can start kind of looking at your own internal systems and data keeping for how are we going to approach these by the expected due dates. So this slide deck will be available to everyone as a reference PDF, but let me just jump right in. So as far as the ESSER and the GEAR reporting, it's important to note that right now, the guidance we're about to give is based on draft reporting requirements that were released by the department on July 29th, 2020. Because they are draft reporting requirements, it is possible that the U.S. Department of Education could make some changes, in which case we will get you an updated document that reflects those final data sets that they're requesting. We're not expecting major changes just based on the limited amount of feedback that you can see posted in relationship to these items. And public comment does close on September 28th, so we're getting close to having that due date in place. Lastly, this resource also contains data requests from the state of Utah, and we'll get more into that here in just a moment. So as far as the reporting schedule goes, the due date for LEA level reporting for this first year of ESSER and GEAR is going to be December 1st, 2020. So we're addressing it today to hopefully give kind of enough lead time to be able to kind of factor in this particular reporting requirement to your overall calendar and schedule as we start to approach that December due date. For the applicable reporting period, that's going to be from the March 13th of 2020, which is the date that these are authorized, funds are authorized for, the date of the national emergency being declared, all the way through September 30th, 2020. So the reporting period will close at the end of this month. And so your data set will be specific to that historical spend period in regards to the questions and the data sets we're going to ask. You'll see that there is a second and a third annual report. This is recognizing that our ESSER and GEAR funds are authorized through September 30th, 2022. So we do have an opportunity as a state to be able to use our COVID funds, again, in response to COVID-related needs, but over an extended period of time. I want to highlight for you that that is not the case with many of the CARES and COVID funds that are out there. So for example, the cities and counties have been providing opportunities to work with their local LEAs on CARES related needs. Their funds expire on December 30th of this year. So there are times where you'll hear that December 30th, the funds are expiring, we have to spend. And I want to be clear, yes, that is true, but not for ESSER and for GEAR, so that you have that difference in kind of knowing when you have funds that will expire and when you have funds that have the opportunity to extend into an additional period. So let's jump into some of these reporting requirements. Just so you know, the State Board of Education has gone through all of the reporting requirements and pulled out those that we can address through our state level systems. So we're trying to really cut this down to just those items that we need from the local level to be able to complete the report as required by the Department of Education. So for the ESSER fund, here are kind of the key items that we're going to be asking LEAs to respond to for that December 1st reporting due date. So the first one is specific to equitable service calculations. And as you heard, Director Donaldson share at the beginning of this, it's a very much a moving target, those equitable services, in regards to the calculation and how it should be approached. So with that said, they are asking for each LEA to declare the methodology for calculating their equitable share, either based on total enrollment of the LEA and participating non-public schools, proportional share based on the Title I Part A funds, or the number of students from low-income families in Title I schools and participating non-public schools. In this case, each LEA is just selecting A, B, or C, and this is again only for our district partners who have the equitable services requirement. Charter schools will not be responding to this particular section. The second item then is going to be the LEA reported expenditures for equitable services. So in your initial submissions to Utah grants, you submitted the plan for what those expenditures would look like. And this is basically a question of how much have you expended within the reporting period ending on September 30th related to that intent that you submitted with your plan. For that, we're asking for the number of funds that have been expended by the LEA on public schools, as well as the funds that have been expended on equitable services for the non-public school students and teachers. The last item in this section is going to be then the LEA reported expenditure of funds on equitable services for GEAR. So we are asking you to break it out between the two funds, how much in equitable services have been for ESSER and how much have been utilized specifically for GEAR. Let's see. All right, there seems to be a question. I'm just going to pause real quick. Didn't we already report the calculation? Yes. So the calculation though is on the intended use of funds. These questions are specific to what have you already spent, if that makes sense. So you're just reporting out this is what we've spent of that intended budget breakdown, if that helps clarify.
Sarah, my question was, because it said possible methodologies for calculating equitable share, we had to submit that. So we have to do that again, is just my question, because in the part of the original grant, there was a document that we had to submit on how we're calculating the possible equitable share to the private schools and to all the Title I schools. Is there something in addition to that?
No, I appreciate that question. And I wonder if Val or Becky want to weigh in. I'll just give a quick kind of high level. The reason we were asking for this to be reported at the LEA level is because there have been, and we still kind of foresee, changes in the guidance related to equitable services from when you submitted your plan to when we actually are going to be submitting this report in December. So this was kind of our way of providing an opportunity for those changes to be reflected and then what we're reporting to the U.S. Department of Education. But Val or Becky, did you want to add to that?
Thank you, Sarah. That's correct. I think it's just because, you know, at the beginning, we were looking at the Title I-A methodology, which is what the CARES Act states. And then the Department of Ed said, no, we want it to be done using this other methodology based on the total enrollment at the private schools. And then because of the lawsuits, that rule has now been vacated. The Department of Ed has not provided any additional information since that occurred. So we aren't sure if they will at some point in time try to appeal that ruling, if they'll just say, okay, we tried and the courts, you know, have ruled against us in multiple lawsuits. We're just going to let the Title I-A methodology stand. So, you know, some of you may have allocated it one way, and now maybe you're looking at any equitable services that have not already been provided to private schools, then maybe you'll adjust that methodology going forward. We certainly don't want you to have to feel like, you know, the private school needs to reimburse the LEA for services that may have already been provided. But going forward, if you still have a lot of funding set aside for equitable services and it's going to change, you know, that amount of funding that you have available for that, then you may wish to adjust that. So I think that's why Sarah is including that in the reporting.
Thanks, Becky. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's jump into then the next category. So this one's a little fun. This is the full-time equivalent positions that exist. Now, this is one where the Utah State Board of Education has given feedback to the Department of Education because it's not super clear what they're asking for. So we've presented both potential outcome cases that we've inferred from the document here, just so that you have awareness. Ideally, we will have one of these that you'll be reporting on once we get that clarification. But this is basically asking for the LEA to report FTE positions as of March 13th, 2020, and then the LEA to report FTE positions as of September 30th, 2020. The lack of clarity that we have in this particular case is this all FTEs, or is this FTE positions created or retained as a result of ESSER funds, and then FTE positions created or retained as a result of GEAR funds as two separate data sets. The reason we propose that is because it seems odd to ask the question of how many positions did you have on March 13, 2020, due to ESSER and GEAR funds, which would be 0 because nobody had funds at that time. So like, why is the department asking that question if their intent is to have it broken out by individual fund sets? Anyway, we are seeking clarification on this, but just a heads up that we would be looking for an LEA to report any changes in either overall FTE or in FTE specific to the use of ESSER or GEAR funds related to personnel. Let's jump to number 7. So this is a question that's about remote learning and CARES funding from the department. So these are yes or no questions. So I really want to highlight that because when I first read this, I think I was living in this world of reporting of like numbers of kids. No. Okay, this is a yes or no that we will be looking for in terms of LEA level reporting. And the question you'll be responding to is, did the LEA use CARES funding for remote learning? Yes or no? If yes, then the department moves in to ask the LEA to report the methods implemented for elementary and secondary levels as a yes or no. And they've provided the key categories they're seeking responses in, which we've included within this bulleted list. So in elementary school, did you utilize submission of assignments for your elementary grades in a remote learning setting, yes or no? And kind of going through each of those individually. You'll see that we have a screenshot of what that kind of draft table looks like in regards to methods, and then choosing yes or no for elementary, and then yes or no for secondary. So again, not looking for individual student counts, but focusing in on a yes, no in terms of each of these individual methods that they've highlighted in their reporting categories. I will note there is also an other. So if you feel like that there's a broad use case for your CARES funding that you used for remote learning that isn't represented, you do have an opportunity to include that as a descriptor within this section. All right, moving to the next item. So student internet access and CARES funding. So this has again been a key conversation that's happening at the national as well as the state level in terms of how are we connecting students to remote learning opportunities. So the question for the LEA to respond to is, did an LEA use CARES funding for student internet access? Yes or no? If yes, they're again seeking that you report out the methods implemented for elementary and secondary grade levels with a yes or no by those subgroups, elementary and secondary. So again, they have mobile hotspots with paid data plans, internet connected devices with paid data plans, district pays for the cost of home internet subscription, district provides home internet access through a district managed wireless network or other. So you'll have an opportunity to be able to respond yes or no in those spaces. And again, we've included just a screenshot of the draft slide so you can kind of get a sense of what that reporting looks like from a yes-no perspective. All right. Continuing with our theme of technology, the next item is student devices for all LEAs. So this question is asking if an LEA, all LEAs that received ESSER or GEAR funds will be required to report the following questions on student devices. So first and foremost, did the LEA use CARES Act funds to provide dedicated learning devices to any students? Yes or no, again, broken down by elementary and secondary. And then the number of students with a dedicated device provided by the LEA. So again, they're looking for a count in terms of how many devices you put out. I will highlight for many of you that your members of the technology community, so leaders for technology at the district and charter school level, participate in a statewide inventory with the Utah Education Network every other year, where they document the number of devices. So that would be a good resource and reference to pull in regards to being able to report out what those number of devices look like available to students in this particular remote learning setting. And again, just a screenshot of the table and what that looks like. Okay. So let's jump into GEAR. So GEAR has a couple of additional items that they are seeking in terms of specific reporting for that. We're combining it all together just because some of the items are duplicative or in alignment with ESSER. So we've just included those and then called out these couple of separate ones here. So for GEAR, they are asking how many schools within the LEA received GEAR funding. Now, this is interesting because many of our GEAR awards are specific to providing individual services to students, and you may have hired personnel that work across schools. So really, in terms of what that looks like is that if a school received any component of services from staff or programming that was procured through GEAR, you would want to count them in regards to having benefited from GEAR funding. The second item is how many private schools within the LEA received GEAR equitable services. And again, it's not looking for an entity to be counted as one. It's looking for an individual count of the report of the number of schools that chose to engage in equitable services. That specific requirement will only be for our districts that have engaged in equitable services with their partners. Okay, so we've basically tried to capture everything on a single slide to be able just to give you like a bulleted list of what the LEA report will look like related to the U.S. Department of Education for CARES federal funding. And so that list is here. We will put together the template for reporting once the public comment period closes and the U.S. Department of Education finalizes those requirements, because we want to make sure that we're working towards the final version and not having to iterate in between. In addition, we have been working with our partners at the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office for the state of Utah, and many of our legislators who have also asked additional questions related to CARES. So our intent in including these items in this single report is to prevent the last minute legislative surveys going out to the community in the January, February, and March timeframe as we receive those requests by legislators. So the additional items that have been requested are highlighted on the next couple of slides. So let me give a quick overview. So there's a lot of interest in PPE procurement in K-12 and looking at, is CARES funding being used to procure additional personal protective equipment to support engagement and learning as we've returned to the school buildings. I will note this is LEA procurement of additional items beyond the state distribution. So if you were using your own local money to be able to procure additional supplies, as we know many LEAs have. So if the answer is yes, that's a yes or no question. We're just looking for each LEA to report a yes or no on PPE that was procured using CARES funding. We have masks for teachers, masks for students, face shields, non-contact thermometers, hand sanitizer stands, plexiglass barriers, desk dividers, cleaning supplies, and then an other category where you can add additional things that you specifically procured that would fall within the PPE category. In addition, the legislature is interested in training for teachers and is asking the LEAs to report, did you use CARES funding for training teachers in needs related to COVID-19, a yes or no? If the answer is yes, our legislators are looking for a total amount of CARES funding that was used to support the training of teachers. Again, this is funding coming to the LEA directly. This is not teachers who chose to engage in some of the USBE and UEM learning opportunities that were funded outside of the LEA. 19 is infrastructure for remote and blended learning. So this is really to complement some of the earlier data sets about student devices that you'll be reporting for the US Department of Education. This really asks an LEA, did you use CARES funding for infrastructure related to remote or blended learning opportunities? So you've already reported devices. So here, if the answer is yes, you would be reporting on things such as classroom cameras, microphones or other audio enhancement tools, devices for teachers, broadband for teachers, or broadband for students. Again, funded through the local CARES effort. Last but not least, there's an optional narrative. So we recognize that in terms of CARES and the different data sets, that most of us are, kind of running as fast as we can in terms of being able to triage and address specific needs. And we wanted to give our LEAs specifically to have an opportunity to communicate to our legislators if there were additional needs or innovative uses of CARES funding that they wanted to be sure our policymakers were aware of. This is optional, it's not required, and we're trying to leave it kind of open-ended so LEAs can share information as they see fit, recognizing it's intended for our state legislators and them making decisions on next steps related to state resources and needs associated with COVID-19. So, December 1st, it's gonna be great. And like I said, we will be following up with a finalized template for reporting as soon as that is possible with the approval of the US Department of Education. So I'm gonna pause and see if there's any questions about reporting, and then we'll share the more exciting news than reporting requirements. So any questions from the group?
I don't even think I know what to ask. You're amazing.
It's a lot, Missy. I could not agree more. I think when we when we first went through it as an agency, we were like, oh my goodness. Okay. The good news is after letting it sit over time, I think in knowing that the majority of the responses are limited to yes or no makes the reporting requirements feel a lot more feasible as opposed to if you were having to report individual like student numbers for each one.
Yeah, for sure.
All
The
right,
data gathering isn't going to be too awful bad. I liked the summary slide that you gave, so I appreciate that. And seeing the application will be easier too. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. Okay, so I think we're waiting for another statement, but I'll go ahead and share kind of the last item, and then if there's individual questions in the chat, I'll just follow up with those through responding in that space. So coming up next week with the Utah State Board of Education meeting, staff have proposed that the State Board of Education consider authorizing the use of funds that were appropriated by our legislators, known as coronavirus relief funds. These are the ones that expire on December 30th of this current year for K-12, to be able to issue those funds out as grants to the community through two mechanisms. So the first mechanism is going to be for a K-12 personal protective equipment or PPE grant that is going to is being proposed for each LEA. So a couple of things about this. So the funding level is around 2.8 million comprehensively. The suggested approach that our board will consider is establishing a $5,000 base and then doing the remaining allocations based on head count. So we've shared, and I'm happy to add them to the chat here momentarily as I wrap up, what those projection sheets look like in regards to what the awards would be for each LEA. A couple of things I would note about that particular opportunity. The first and foremost is that this is for expenditures from March 13th all the way through December 30th. So in looking at it in regards to where can I pay for PPE out of, our recommendation as staff would be that if this grant goes forward, you look at utilizing that grant first. Just because it is time limited and we just don't have a ton of time to be able to spend. You can also use it to procure PPE that then you're holding in a warehouse situation, which we know many of our LEAs are doing, trying to be prepared for what we could be facing as we enter fall and winter and the unknowns of COVID. So that is item number one. In order for this to be enacted, we would need our State Board of Education to approve the use of those funds and then as well approve the base and the distribution amount before we'd be able to move forward with it in the grants management system as final. Questions about PPE?
Sir, there's not a question about PPE. There is a question that popped up about the previous portion of your presentation.
Yes. So the report is going to be one. We're just going to do a single report, Erin, for both ESSER and for GEAR. We're combining it all under the window of CARES, just because there's technically from our agency, it's two separate reports. However, it's not necessary for you to submit two separate reports if all the information is in the single one. We just felt like streamlining it for the LEAs was appropriate, and then we'd break out the data at the state level and report as necessary. So thanks.
Sarah, on PPE, is there a definition of what that would constitute? Like, is plexiglass considered PPE, any of that stuff? That's okay.
Yep, so it is. So as far as PPE goes, we've been pretty generous in terms of how that's being defined, really wanting it to be at the local level. I'm seeing there's a question about individual classroom air filters. So I can respond to that one specifically. I know we have a board member who feels very strongly about the air filters, so I would say yes, in terms of those being included as well. The reason that we are approaching it this way is because we did do a survey of our superintendents as well as our charter directors on what were the additional needs for PPE. And I have to be honest, it's all over the place. It really depends on your individual community, what you've been able to invest in, and what your existing needs still are. And those are just so locally driven that the best approach seemed to be able to provide money as opposed to doing a statewide procurement of more reusable masks and then going through the distribution of that, because we recognize that that would benefit some, but not necessarily all. So this allows you to be able to use the funds to meet those local needs as best as possible. Okay, the second item, just because we love to keep it fun here at USBE, is that the legislature in the August special session also authorized additional funds that could be used towards classroom supplies. Here, let me get, sorry, I will bring up the exact language so I don't get it wrong. They authorized additional funds for classroom supplies, enhancements, and equipment for K-12 related to their response to COVID-19. So in that specific space, we will also be asking the State Board of Education to approve a grant program that would distribute $14.1 million to our local LEAs, again, with a $5,000 base plus headcount enrollment, that would then be available to procure items within those three categories. I will note that all of these are still specific to the requirements that it's aligned with CARES funding. So it can't be used for materials that were included in the budget or procured prior to March 13th of this upcoming year. And you do need to draw a connection between those materials and your response to COVID-19. However, I will note that the backup for this particular item also states that staff at the State Board of Education are encouraging as much flexibility as possible to allow for local LEAs to meet their individual needs within the overall federal allowances. So I know that those are broad categories, and we're intentionally trying to keep them that way, and have presented them for approval to the State Board of Education that way to allow for each LEA to use those funds as they see best fit. Again, these are funds that have an expiration date of December 30th of this current year, so 2020. So again, it would be a time limited kind of spend, but would be yet another resource you could use to being able to address some of the COVID needs in your community. So just to give like the overview, we're proposing 2 new grants on Thursday of next week. K-12 PPE at $2.8 million distributed to LEAs with a $5,000 base plus headcount. The second grant is for coronavirus relief, and that is a $14.1 million grant program with a $5,000 base plus headcount that would be used to address classroom supplies, enhancements, and equipment. Any questions about those opportunities? It's a lot. I hear you. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and drop the draft projection PDFs into the chat. You'll notice they're watermarked draft. That is because this hasn't been approved by the State Board of Education yet. So we wanted to definitely give you the heads up, but I also would encourage caution and not spending that money until it's approved by the State Board of Education, so that you have that available to you through Utah Grants Management moving forward. So a heads up, an opportunity for planning, but we would not encourage you to go spend that money between now and next week until we have that approval. So with that, I really do appreciate all of your hard work. We still do have a couple more gear grants that are due by Friday, September 25th. That is this Friday. If your LEA does not have a gear grant submitted, we certainly encourage you to submit by that due date, because we want to make sure that that money is in the field and serving our students as best as possible. So Becky, thank you so much for your time. And if there's no other questions, we'll just turn it back over to you.
Sarah, thank you so much. That was wonderful and exciting news that there will be additional resources that will be available. So we'll look forward to that board meeting, and I will send out the board agenda when Mark Peterson posts that for the board meeting the first week of October. We'll keep you posted on that. And then I'll send you the board summary as well when Mark gets that posted. So we are right on schedule, and I'm so excited that Cheryl Ellsworth is here today with us, as she always is, and she's going to provide some additional information and resources for you related to parent, family, and community engagement. So thank you, Sarah, and welcome to Cheryl, and we'll turn the time to Cheryl.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Becky. It's great to be with all of you today. I will be presenting basically using a PowerPoint, but a quick introduction. My name is Cheryl Ellsworth. I work at the State Board of Education as the Family and Community Engagement Specialist. So for those of you who are new directors, welcome. And I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and begin. And that's my baby. Okay, so as stated, I am the Family and Community Engagement Specialist. And for those of you who are older directors, the first few slides are a review, but I think it's really important that we recognize that some people are new, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So when we say what we mean by Family Community Engagement Specialist, in my role, I share next or best practices, meaning through the directors meetings. There will be newsletters sent out with family engagement practices beginning the month of October. Or if you're in a turnaround or school improvement role, you may see me pop in meetings at LIFT. I also train educators on evidence-based strategies, namely the home visits, because some of the other evidence-based strategies have actual trainers nationally that will come locally to support an LEA. I also provide TA support for LEAs who receive a risk score of a 4 or a 5 on the parent survey for special education. So every year, the largest 4 LEAs in Utah receive a special education parent survey, or a survey for students of disabilities, to make sure that they are doing appropriate family engagement practices. And for all of the other LEAs, they receive that survey every other year. And it's for a certain group of families that have a mix of different disabilities, demographics are mixed racially. So we get a good idea of how students with disabilities and families of students with disabilities are supported in the special education process. So I think it's important that we understand the meaning or the definition that we use when we say family engagement. In the past, you'll hear people say parent involvement. And I just want you to think deeper when you're thinking of the word involvement versus engagement. I was kind of thinking like my dating experiences. I was involved with people, but when I was seriously contemplating marriage, I was engaged to somebody. And so that, or when I was committed to marrying someone, I was engaged to them. So engagement's a lot deeper. And we also recognize that families look and feel a lot of different ways. So we no longer use that word parent, but we use the word family. And this is the definition that we use as a state that we've adapted and adopted from the state of Connecticut. Family engagement is a full, equal, and equitable partnership among families educators, and community partners to promote children's learning and development from birth through college and career. And so it's important that we recognize that first, that this is not just, we're not just seeing this in the K-12 sector, that we're seeing this in early childhood from birth through the 16th sector of college, but that it's full, equal, and equitable. And sometimes when I think about this idea of equal and equitable, I think about the winter. In the winter time, all of our kids need coats and gloves and hats to keep warm. That's the equal part. Everybody needs something to keep warm. The equitable part is that our kids have different sizes. So they need different sizes for their coats, they need different sizes for their hats, they need different sizes for their gloves. And so that's the equitable part, that we are recognizing that our families are coming to us in all different ways, and some may need a lot more extra support, and others are very easy to work with, and they're just happy to do whatever the school needs. So it's really meeting families where they are. And I always share with my friends, because I have a young family, and my friends my age, we have young families, and their kids are kind of in elementary school age. And sometimes, you know, they ask me, you know, what can I do to support other families as well? And so really utilizing the families that are willing and able to help bring along other families in school partnership is also something to be thinking about. How do we utilize the people that always do show up anyway? In regards to family engagement as it relates to school improvement, I think it's important to understand that family engagement is one of the 5 key predictors of school improvement, along with school leadership, teacher capacity, safety and order, curriculum, and family engagement. I was recently in a book club learning about the smartest kids of the world, and I was reading this book with a very critical eye, because I'm always thinking about, okay, what about our kids on the margins and the kids who don't have everything just given to them, they're starting at a different starting point, all of those things. Anyway, something that was brought up in the school or in the book club is the needs. And so someone mentioned, well, if kids have all of these needs and schools start to improve, why don't we just keep those funds and those resources going? And I'm like, that's a really good question, because sometimes I think when schools are improving, we have this idea, well, let's go ahead and take away some of these other pieces, but we recognize that you need school leadership, you need teacher capacity, there needs to be safety and order, there needs to be strong curriculum alignment and family engagement. And a weakness in any one of these areas, as you can see, decreases a school's chances of improving to lower than 10%. So there's 3 key family engagement frameworks that I work with when supporting educators. The first one comes from the U.S. Department of Education's framework for family engagement. And they said that family engagement should be 3 things. It should be relational, it should build the capacities of families and staff, and it should be linked to learning. So we're recognizing there are things that are making a higher impact on family engagement, and there are things that are definitely great things to have at a school. But when we're thinking about where do we really spend our time, and if teachers are already feeling stretched, instead of adding on all of these other pieces, why don't we work on things that will yield to a higher impact? The second framework that I want to share with you today is that family engagement is grounded in trust. And when we're looking at teachers as they're coming in to schools straight from higher ed or an alternative route to licensure, a lot of times they are being taught about this idea of academic partnering, but we're recognizing that it has to be, meaning family engagement needs to be grounded in trust before academic partnership ever happens. And so if we're thinking about how can we get families who we don't see much or that aren't responding to us or we know nothing about? It's throwing academic language at them is not going to create a partnership. Building it on a foundation of trust will. And then the third framework that I utilize, I share, and I trust is the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships. This comes out of the work of the Harvard School of Education, from the work of Dr. Karen Mapp and other researchers. And right now, the dual capacity framework is in its version 2. And I'm just going to show you a quick 5-minute video that helps explain the importance of this framework.
The first version of the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family School Partnership was launched at the 2014 Family and Community Engagement Conference held by the Institute for Educational Leadership. This research-based framework was authored in collaboration with the United States Department of Education and published by the Southwest Educational Development Lab. The framework was created to offer a tool for educators, policymakers, families, and community members to understand what's needed to cultivate and sustain partnerships between home and school that support student achievement and school improvement. Since 2014, I've gathered information from current research and from stakeholders about what was useful and what improvements were needed to the framework. Stakeholders suggested that they wanted the new framework to reflect a sense of growth and improvement, and that educators and families come together by building the capacity of each side to work in deeper partnership. Second, the framework needed to more clearly articulate the challenges that got in the way of partnership between families and educators. For example, the new framework points out that many educators have not been exposed to excellent practice, and that's often because they simply haven't received any training in this area. Many families haven't been exposed to excellent practice either, and many have had negative experiences in school, both when they were children and as adults. The way forward starts with the essential conditions, which includes both the process and organizational conditions. These are the nuts and bolts that are a part of any effective family and community engagement practice. The process conditions describe the key components of effective practice to build partnership, and the organizational conditions describe the systems and structures, in other words, the infrastructure needed to support and sustain partnership. One thing that the field stated loud and clear is that all partnerships have to start with trust. We know from the research of Tony Bragg and Barbara Schneider how important relational trust between families and educators is to the effective functioning of a school and to the building of dependable partnerships among the adults. So this was moved to the top of the list in the process conditions. The organizational conditions set the table for the effective execution of the process conditions. The next section highlights the type of growth we should see when all the essential conditions are met. These 4 C's are based on research from my colleague, Monica Higgins. We all hear that term capacity building, but what does it actually mean? We know it's important for both sides to improve their knowledge and skills to engage in partnership. But Monica informs us that that's not the only element of capacity building that's important. Who you know, who you can turn to for information, is also an important part of capacity. We have research that reveals that our beliefs and values shift in positive ways as a result of working with others. Last but not least, the confidence of our families and educators to be able to do this work of partnership grows. And finally, in this last section, we see what happens when educators and families build their capacity to work in partnership with each other. We now have a reciprocal exchange that speaks to the power of both families and educators to support each other's continued growth. Educators connect family engagement to their day-to-day work with students and see families as contributors to their children's education. Families engage in various ways that make a big difference for their children's learning. And at the end of the day, we're able to see that this work truly helps us get to the outcome we're all striving for: more effective partnerships that support student and school improvement.
Okay, and if you're interested in learning more about like really diving into the dual capacity framework to help your LEA, I would encourage you to go to dualcapacity.org. If you're also interested in learning more about other resources that use the dual capacity framework in training your educators or training your staff or training people in the district, I'd be happy to connect you with a program or a model called FACE that we were hoping to roll out in Utah. There was not enough traction, and then COVID happened. But I've seen districts who have used this model to help them in their foundation of really helping their teachers get a better understanding of how to better engage families, really support them in their work. So one of the things that I talked about earlier is the parent-teacher home visit project, and I just wanted to share some quick updates in relation to that. So if you are one of the following LEAs, you need to use your fiscal year 19 funds, which expire September 2021. If you have any questions about your remaining balance, please reach out to me or Tammy Long, and we can get you the amount that you need or that you still have remaining. Many of these LEAs also have funds for this upcoming fiscal year or this current fiscal year. And the window was extended and closes today to get your application in. So those of you who are part of an LEA who received a grant from us and you got your applications in, please feel free to go ahead and pay your teachers for the visits. I will be able to get those applications passed through me and onto the next approvers sometime in the next week, but the window closed today to get your application in. So one of the newer initiatives that I wanted to gauge some interest in and something to look forward to in a whole idea of how the state's going to come together in the work of family engagement is the Belonging Schools Initiative. Now, I've lightly touched on the Belonging Schools Initiative in the past, but we are finally at a point where we are going to be getting a contract with the Flamboyant Foundation after the October board meeting. So I really wanted to introduce this work to you today for those of you who are new and for those of you who aren't new, to see if you are an LEA that would be interested in participating in this. So in 2018 to 2019, so for about 20 months, I was part of a fellowship with a few district leaders and someone from the University of Utah. So we took this K-16 approach. And we came up, after doing research here in Utah, we came up what is known as the Belonging Schools Initiative. And our vision for the Belonging Schools Initiative is that all families in Utah will experience schools as spaces of belonging, spaces where they are welcomed and valued, where they can build relationships and learn with educators, where their engagement has a positive impact on students and the school. So this was based on, again, local research after doing empathy interviews from students to parents to teachers to administrators to legislators to all kinds of groups of people. And we recognized there were 3 key user statements that came out of our work. That there needed to be stronger welcoming and valuing, that educators communicate to families that they are welcomed and valued in the school. We found out that from families that they wanted more reciprocal learning, that families said, we have things that we know about our children too, and so we don't want to just come to the school and feel like being talked at. And so educators actively inquire, listen, and learn with families. And then we learned from all of our interviews and our research that educators allow themselves in schools to be impacted by what families ask and share. So families are saying, you know, if I can only meet with you at 8 o'clock a.m. because I have 2 or 3 jobs, we hope that you'd be interested in at least responding to your request to talk with me. And so families were saying that hopefully they can see an impact in no matter what form of engagement that they can do, they can see some kind of impact from the school. And so this brought us to our 3 user needs statements around welcoming and valuing, again, reciprocal learning and impact. So a lot of times when I get, you know, emails or calls from districts saying, you know, we want to do a better job at engaging our families. I'm excited to hear that, and I've recognized more than ever family engagement is absolutely critical. And it's been really interesting to hear or get more calls and get more, there's more fear from the districts and other LEAs about not engaged families because they feel like, oh, we don't see families as much, we don't really know what's going on. And so again, we're trying to do a lot more proactive approaches versus reactive approaches. But something that I would have you consider is, instead of saying, is this a good practice? Is this a good practice? Is this a good practice? I would look at each practice and say, does it welcome and value families? Is there reciprocal learning? And do families feel some form of impact? That way you have a rubric on whatever engagement that you feel is appropriate from your district. Because I will tell you, driving from Box Elder to San Juan, there are so many kinds of families in our state and different kinds of needs. Our more remote communities really operate very differently. Our more suburban and urban communities, and our rural communities also operate very differently. So instead of giving you this laundry list, I would encourage you to say, what can we do with our context to learn what we can do better as an LEA? And so how this connects to our agency, meaning the Utah State Board of Education's initiatives, meaning the Belonging Schools Initiative, and the connections are the following. So first, the USBE, we have a strategic plan at the State Board of Education, and how the Belonging Schools Initiative connects to that is goal 1D is to increase engagement of young children in early learning experiences. As far as special education and indicator 8, as I shared with you earlier, that the Office of Special Education Program wants each state to gauge a percentage of parents whose child is receiving special education services who report that the schools facilitated parent involvement as a means of providing services and results for children with disabilities. As far as Every Student Succeeds Act, whether it's school improvement, TSI, CSI plans are developed with timely and meaningful consultation from administrators, educators, paraprofessionals, parents, etc. And also in Title I, each local educational agency that receives funds under this part shall develop jointly with and agree on with and distribute to parents and family members of participating children a written parent and family engagement policy. So this Belonging Schools initiative connects to all pieces, not only at the state level, but also at the LEA level. So what our plan for advanced equity through family engagement using the Belonging Schools initiative is the following, and this is where I'm hoping for you to decide. We are an LEA that wants to be involved in this, and we want to do better in our community. So here are some of our goals just for year one. We've had to tweak this a lot, actually. I was planning to roll this out in April, and here we are almost in October, and we haven't quite rolled this out yet. So we've had to tweak what we want to do. There were a lot more goals for year one, but right now we've reduced it to 2. We want to convene a statewide family engagement collaborative. So the USBE and Flamboyant Foundation, so that's the same group that I did the fellowship with. We're going to be contracting with them, and we will recruit a cohort of educators and family engagement practitioners to launch the Family Engagement Collaborative, or the FEC. And the FEC cohort will be comprised of at least 2 people per school represented. So you may be thinking, oh, there's a few schools in my district that I want to be a part of this. We recognize there need to be at least 2 people per school represented. And right now, all of the training will be done virtually. Then we like to pilot a Belonging Schools design program. The USBE and Flamboyant Foundation will launch a pilot program that guides LEAs through the process of developing local plans that advance educational equity through family engagement. Family engagement coaches will offer resources, technical assistance, and seed funding. So again, this is going to be very much designed to your local context versus, again, a laundry list or ideas, which again, I'll share in the newsletter and I'll be happy to do that. But sometimes things don't work for different communities. And I'm really pushing you as directors to think of like, what does my community, or what do our communities need in our local context? So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and take any questions that anyone might have as far as the Belonging Schools initiative goes. Yes, okay, so I have a question. Would you mind dropping your slides into the chat? Yes, I sent my whole PowerPoint to Becky, who is a support staff, who's Becky Peters. So I believe everyone will have access to that. Is that right, Becky?
This is Becky Donaldson. Yes, we'll make all of that available when we have the recording posted. Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay, thanks so much. Any other questions? Okay, so I have a question. We've done home visits for years, but this year we've decided not to send staff into homes because of COVID. What are schools doing to continue with family engagement building without going into homes? Great question. So of all the trainings that I've done of home visits this year with LEAs, most people are doing socially distanced home visits outside outside of the home. The only place that the visit cannot happen is at the school. So they're meeting in neutral locations. They're meeting as close to the home as possible. Some are bringing chairs, like lawn chairs, so that they can have like a meaningful conversation. In my schools in Washington County, which are very, very hot, teachers are like, we're bringing umbrellas, we're bringing water bottles to make sure that they're keeping hydrated. We have recognized that the home visits are most effective if they're as close to the home as possible. So again, I see someone says we're doing virtual home visits through Zoom. Zoom is also an option. I always encourage that to be the very last option. And the reason why is because we're so heavily connected to technology that we're not making the connections like we used to. When families are seeing that we're doing all that we can to get to them, again, wearing masks, so the teachers are wearing masks, they're bringing umbrellas, they're bringing water bottles, they're bringing chairs, they're meeting in neutral locations. Again, they are keeping distance, but they are trying their best to actually physically see the families, because if they're only waiting and utilizing technology, again, there are some kids that we are not seeing and they're not showing up and we have no connections to them. So if we can make some kind of relational connection physically, we recognize that the connection is better. Thank you, Carrie. And I hope Box Elder has done some really, really great things when it comes to home visits. They had really high numbers. So Carrie, I hope that you'll have some educators that would be interested in the Belonging Schools initiative. Are there any other questions?
Carrie, did you do anything differently with your home visits, or did you just do home visits with masks and stuff?
We have just done our home visits just the same. We've let that option be open to parents if they want us to come. We have had zero problems so far. They've all still wanted them to come to their homes. Our participation is just as up as it was last year. In fact, we have a higher participation rate because we had a couple of our Title I school teachers trying to get them on board, and they were a little leery last year, and they're all gung-ho now. So we've actually had a great response to it. Families really do want to seek out. Some of them have been what Cheryl described, just on the porch, teachers standing on the lawn, talking. Like right now in the fall, it's been perfect for them to be able to do that. In August and September is when they've done the majority of them so far, but we really have had no problems with trying to get into the home. And I echo what Cheryl said. I told them there, Zoom is where some things, sometimes that has to happen, but I told them that needed to be a last resort. And so far they've not had to use that at all. It's worked great. It's really been a fun thing, especially coming off COVID and everyone being so isolated. Everyone's craving that social interaction and to know who my teacher is and that they care. And it's just been an odd year. And especially we have an online school that we started this year. And for those online families that are even still isolated, it was great. They couldn't go in the home, but they could meet, so they could social distance. The kids was on the porch, the teachers were on the lawn, and it's been so great for those families to be connected to the schools. So it's been great. We really haven't had any problems.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
If you haven't started it, I highly recommend it. It's been amazing. It's been a game changer for our community.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or thoughts or comments? I really appreciate it. I did not plant Carrie in this training today, so I appreciate her feedback. Okay, Becky, that is all that I have. Please be keeping your ears open. I'm going to be, as soon as we get that, like the board saying, all right, move forward with Belonging Schools initiative, you're going to be hearing a lot from me, because I'm trying to find, and I feel like in every LEA that I've ever trained, there's about 2 teachers that really stick out. That really care about family engagement. Those are the leaders that we're looking for to get this really going, so that you're making and creating meaningful family engagement for your local community and context. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was a great presentation. Thanks for letting us know about the initiative that you're going to be rolling out, and there's opportunities. And thanks for those of you that shared what you're doing in your own LEAs that are really reaching out and doing the kinds of things that Dr. Karen Mapp talks about in that dual capacity framework. And Val posted a comment responding to Carrie in Box Elder, saying it's just an indication of how important those personal connections are and how much that means to parents and students when they know that their teachers and the LEA staff really do care deeply about them. So thank you. We are good to wrap up now. I want to make sure that I give a special thanks to JM for sharing that wonderful example of how to effectively braid funds to really serve students and improve outcomes for kids. To the wonderful work that Missy is doing in Murray to make sure that, all of her kids have access to the internet so that they can be successful engaging in their online learning. As that comes and goes, and some days, kids have to be remote, other days they are in person, and we know schools are closing down sometimes temporarily because of outbreaks. So such important work. And thank you to Sarah Young and Patrick Lee for joining us today and talking about the kinds of information that we're going to need to report back to the U.S. Department of Education about the CARES Act funding, and then also the new opportunities that will be, coming forward after board meeting once the board has a chance to approve those funding proposals for additional relief funding. I want to thank Cheryl as well. She's always so willing to help us with these meetings, and she's such a strong advocate for all parents and all families. And so thank you to her. I want to thank Jerry Record, our wonderful Director of Media Services at USBE, for being present, helping us with the meeting, making sure everything's working correctly. And his Bitmoji is the best. See his happy face there with his mask on. And Becky Peters, who's always so helpful in making sure that everything runs smoothly, and we have everybody's handouts. She'll be posting the recording when that's available with all of the materials. And I appreciate all the presenters for being willing to share their slides and information with us. That helps all of us grow. We really miss you. We talk about you frequently and how much we miss seeing you and having those opportunities to engage with you face to face. So if everybody's willing and can, would you turn on your cameras for just a minute so we can do our Brady Bunch look, so we can see everybody and wave at everyone. And it's just, we miss you so much. I mean, it's just so fun. It was fun to see all of your little names in your little squares, but yeah, to have an opportunity to actually see your faces. And
Hell, Missy's on the beach, man. I want to be where Missy's at.
Yeah, there's Missy in Salt Lake, and we see Steve down in Iron County, and Rachel at the charter school, and Amy at, it's just so fun to see you, because we really do. There's Tracy from Park City, and I see my wonderful staff that are just so helpful to me on an everyday basis. And we know some of you are new. We're welcoming Aaron Wilson in his new role in Granite School District, and Odie's joining us today. And so you're part of a wonderful family here. It's a wonderful community. Everybody is supportive of one another. Everyone shares with one another. When Val goes out and sees really fabulous things happening in a district or a school, we're able to share that. As Christelle Estrada goes out and sees amazing things happening for students who are English learners, we're able to share that information and promote it. There's so many fabulous things taking place. And so for me, it's really a privilege, and I do truly mean that. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to work with each one of you. And so virtual hugs to everybody. 2021 has to be better, right? So we can see you again in person and interact like we love to do at our meetings. So thank you so much for sharing your morning with us today. Do not hesitate ever to reach out to us with any questions. We're available always by email. You can call us at any time you need. We're here to help you and support you in any possible way that we can. So have a wonderful afternoon. We're wishing everybody the very best as we move forward in this new now, which is just, I feel like I'm in part of a dystopian novel, which that's not a genre that I read, but I feel like I'm caught up in this dystopian novel or dystopian movie, and it does not end. You keep thinking, we're going to get to the end, we're going to get to the end, and then there's no end. And so eventually there has to be an end, right? And we're all going to come out on the other side of this, and we will have learned important lessons. And but we have this wonderful community together that means so much to me. So, and I know our new people are going to be so excited to interact with all of you. Thank you to Tracy Van Deventer, and we're so glad she's with us, and I appreciate her monitoring the chat box for questions. So have an absolutely amazing afternoon. Thank you all so much. Bye, everyone.